Okay, so yeah, so I just threw together the presentation. It doesn't have to be this formal, but I figured there's a lot of people who can't be here, so it's a nice little package to like just throw up on the website or email out, and people can look at it on their own. But we'll definitely have time to just talk kind of informally and ask questions afterwards. But I wanted to frame the whole school conversation just with a couple of slides. So the 4Kids Toronto team is doing what we're calling Schoolyard climate conversations. So it's a take on the kitchen table climate conversation, but we're calling it the schoolyard climate conversation, the kind of way that you stand around with parents at drop off or pick up time with teachers and you just kind of like gab away, that sort of thing, right? But sharing about climate and climate movement and how schools and school communities can get involved. So we've been doing that for the past few months, or the past maybe like school year. It's our first kind of foray into it, and now we're going to our second school year of this. So some context. So what do Canadians think about climate change? This is kind of why we did this, right? So you can see that 76% of Canadians are really worried. They think it's really serious, but only 48%, so half of us, can correctly identify the GHGs, which are primary drivers of climate change, right? So the worry is there, but the knowledge really isn't, right? So like the first thing is to increase climate literacy. And if any of you have paid attention to school curriculum, across Canada, there's really nothing about climate change explicitly in any curriculums. There is a lot about maybe sustainability or this. And so as a teacher with knowledge, you could definitely connect it, but it's not explicitly in the curriculum anywhere to say you've got to teach about climate change. So there's that context for you. Okay, so parents and teachers, sorry for my cough. I'm just trying to get over this sickness. So why parents and teachers? So I'm sure you have all seen this study done. It was a global study of youth, 10,000 youth around the world, and how they feel about climate change. So it's pretty striking. About half are extremely worried. And the qualifier was so worried about the future and climate change that it inhibited their daily ability to function, which should really alarm parents and teachers. I'm also a teacher for context as well as a parent, so that's my lens. And just the feelings that youth associate with climate change, right? Sad, afraid, anxious, angry, powerless, all these feelings, right? So that's a big piece of feeling why we're doing what we're doing. And what we know from child psychologists is that when kids are worried or anxious, the worst thing that the adults can do is to avoid it. And what a lot of us do with climate change, because we're uncomfortable, especially teachers and parents talking about it, is we avoid. We're like, oh, no, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. Like, they're working on it. It's not going to affect you. Don't worry, right? But we know from child psychologists that when parents and teachers and the adults in their lives are avoidant about a situation or uncomfortable about a situation, it just makes it worse for the kids. It makes them worry more, right? You don't acknowledge someone's worry about something and you're not kind of making a plan to address it. It only makes things worse, right? Sorry. So this is another study just came out of CAMH, which is good. So that's the Wellbeing Ontario students. This is just Ontario context. I'm sure it's very similar across Canada, but I just wanted to give you the snapshot. So this just came out in 2021. They do this mental health snapshot of Ontario students every couple of years. So half of students are depressed about their future because of climate change. So I'm just really hammering this home. And the point of this is that if you are talking to your school officials, if you're talking to teachers or principals or anyone in the board, this is the stuff that we have to be telling them. Like, look at this, look at the data. This is what it's telling us. It's a glaring problem amongst our youth, and we're not really doing anything about it in schools. So the role for schools. So there's this wonderful report written up that I linked to. It's called Unleashing the Creativity of Teachers and Students to Combat Climate Change. And it's all kind of about why schools matter. But there's a really cool research being done that shows how much of a major player schools are as a climate solution, like on the same level as solar panels and wind turbines, right? So research shows that only 16% of high school students in high and middle income countries were to receive a decent climate change education, we'd see a nearly 19 gigaton reduction of carbon dioxide by 2050. So if you could imagine if that 16% of high school students were to go up to 100% or 80%, right? The gigaton per year reduction would be major. And that's because that kids who are educated about climate change make different decisions for their lives, right? And they also impact their parents' decisions. If you go into this, if you read this through, it'll make you all fired up because it's so, the potential here is enormous and it's so untapped, right? But it's a major player as a climate solution, and it's really worth doing, okay? On the other side of it is if you're talking to school officials, your teachers or principals, whoever, it's good for kids. So what we know in terms of educational research is that when kids are engaged in real world authentic tasks, right, where say they're doing a pollinator garden at their school, or they're figuring out a new bike route to in their school parking lot, they're co-creating that with some planners to make it more bike friendly, or if they're doing some sort of like sustainability, like sewing, learn how to sew your clothes and fix things in their school, or whatever they're doing in their school. If they're doing some sort of real world task that's experiential and hands-on, their engagement increases with their learning, their attendance at school goes up, and their achievement increases. So for school officials, for superintendents, for principals, this is like a no-brainer, right? This is good all around, and this targets all the things that they're trying to target, right? So the bottom line for me is what I always say to people is, if we want kids to stay in school and do well at school, we have to give them a reason to be there, right? Because what we know is 50% of our youth are looking at their future terrified and are so afraid about climate change, they're having trouble functioning on a daily basis. If we're not addressing it at school, we're not giving them a reason to come, right? Like if their education isn't relevant to them, if they don't see that this is making a difference in terms of the problems that they care about, and if we're just educating as usual and doing things as usual, then what's the point for them? And you know what? It's not just kids, as teachers feel that too. You know, the more that we look at how screwed up the backdrop is of our world in crisis, the more that education comes apart from that, the more it kind of feels like, what is the point of doing this job and what's the point of coming to school? So if you do decide to do this kind of project with your group and you want to give these presentations, so sorry, I should back up. These presentations that we give are like I said, kitchen table climate conversations. So it's climate science 101, but it's also how to get involved in and through your school community. So it's not curriculum reform, okay? We don't have time for that. I'm not saying that's not a worthwhile endeavor, because I know there are youth groups who are pushing for that really hard, especially in BC. It is worthwhile, but in terms of the impact that we have to make and the time frame we have to make it, what we know in terms of like the past data is it takes about 10 years on average for curriculum to change in a fundamental way. We don't really have that time, right? But the kinds of projects that schools do, greening their schoolyards, right? The kinds of like learning that can be embedded into the curriculum through the staff and the students being more engaged and caring about climate change, that has an impact right now, right? So if you're doing this and you want to have these conversations and you want to have them with other parents at your kid's school, or if you want to have them with the principal or the vice principal or teachers, or you want to like bring it to a staff meeting, or you want to bring it to a parent council or whatever, kind of these are the ways in. And you know, we're pushing because we want climate action, but if you frame it in terms of student wellness, right? Student mental health and well-being is a huge thing in every school board across the nation. It's like number one in any director's plan for their school board. It's student mental health and well-being. So if you think back to those studies of how much climate is impacting our students' mental health, it is incumbent upon school boards and teachers and parents to do something about it. And right now, nothing is being done in an official capacity at schools. And the other piece is anti-racism. That's also a huge thing. Anti-racism, Indigenous education. We know that we're in this mess, right, because of the colonial attitudes that we have. We also know that climate is a vulnerability multiplier, that it's tied up with anti-racism work because it affects marginalized and racialized communities more. So that's another way of looking at it and bringing it to school officials, right? And this is why this matters. This is another piece of this anti-racist puzzle, which maybe we're not addressing in a really in a really robust way right now. So yes, so that's just some of my kind of quick tips for kind of making the case. In terms of the actual schoolyard climate conversation, what it is, this is the breakdown of it. We have our standard conversation is an hour and a half long. We are working on a 20-minute version for parent councils, because if you've ever been in a parent council meeting, they have no time for anything. It's like you get a 10-minute spot. So we're working on a 20-minute version, and we're trying to be very flexible with whatever schools need, right? Because as I kind of said before, is there's so many like avenues into this. So like you might informally have a group of parents that are kind of friends at your school who are interested in this. So maybe your group wants to facilitate for those parents on a Zoom call one night, or maybe you take it to your principal and your principal's like, yeah, let's do this. And they're going to do a school-wide info night, and your group can facilitate the conversation and you get a whole hour, right? Or maybe it's like a PA day that staff has and you get to come in for 10 minutes and talk about climate. Right? So these are all the different ways that you can kind of share this information and do a schoolyard climate conversation. And so we're very flexible with how we shape that and what the length is. But this is kind of this is the list of what we address. So it's climate science 101. We do a kind of come at it as like our audience are newbies, like they don't know anything about climate. They're not in the climate movement. Like we just kind of spell it out, like what's happening, why, what are the impacts, and we do it in a local way. So for the city of Toronto, we talk a lot about what our climate plan here is in the city of Toronto. We also talk about what the climate impacts here in our city, both now and 30 years down the line. And we do talk about the global context as well, because we really frame it as a climate justice issue. So there's that segment of it, which is important. We do a lot of creating space for reaction. So we have our conversation is broken up into chunks, and after every chunk, there's a let's talk section. So people just get to kind of voice their responses, because sometimes people are like, holy shit, that was a lot. I had no idea it was so bad, and just like need a space to be like, whoa, oh my God, and we have those conversations sometimes. And just to kind of share, what are the climate impacts in your life, right? Like, how does climate change play out in your community? We have space for those conversations as well. So that's really important, is that space for just talking and story sharing. And then we really try to impress the kind of why you matter, like why parents and teachers, why are we bringing it to you guys? They have a lot on their plates already as parents and teachers, but like I said, because we are the adults in our kids' lives, and we're all partners in their upbringing, right? Teachers, school staff, parents, guardians, and how we are acknowledging or helping them engage in this, the crisis of all of our lives matters. And right now we are kind of MIA, right? Missing in action. Where are schools? Where are teachers? Where are parents on this? A lot of people are not really engaged yet, because it's real hard. It's hard to do, and there's no roadmap to do it, right? So that supports that piece. And what can we do in schools? So we do concrete examples. We have a whole part of our deck is just like inspiring action. So it's examples of things that happened at schools. So example 1, kids had an info night where these grade 8s broke up into Zoom chats and they taught all the adults who came about climate and justice and water, and they invited their MP and their MPP and their city councilor, and they made an action plan for their community, right? Slide 2, these high school students co-planned a better way to have bikes come into the school parking lot instead of it being car-centric, right? Next slide, we have a bunch of students who created a community garden at their school that supports their school lunch program and gives back to some of their community in need. Right? There's like so many things you can do. And so I think it's really important to give people concrete examples of what does school climate action look like, right? And there's things that are really big and the things that are really small. A school pollinator garden, greening your schoolyard. It tackles the urban heat island effect, not only for your school, but for surrounding neighbors, right? It's like, there's so much impact. And finally, we really talk about not doing it alone. So we talk a lot about community organizations. So one of the activities that we push for in our resource toolkit, which is the takeaway from our presentation, is a community mapping thing. So, okay, I care about climate. I want to do something. What's the first thing I should do? First thing you should do is sit down with this template and figure out who are the organizations and the people in your community already doing this work, right? And then from there, we can reach out and maybe we can connect and do something together, right? We don't have to do this alone. That's just a contact slide. So if you want a copy of our presentation, we're very happy to give you a presentation. You can make a copy and copy it, do whatever you want with it if you want to do your own thing. And I'm also happy to chat more about the program. But yeah, I try to be really quick.